Thank you, Gobi, for having me on your channel here today. So my rank is Petty Officer, second class. Fraser is my last name. That's how we would refer to each other in the military. So I joined the Canadian Armed Forces, the Naval Reserve, which is the part-time component of the Royal Canadian Navy, when I was 18 years old, straight out of high school, which was in 2005. And I joined originally as a musician, so to play in the Navy marching band. That was a great experience for me. And as a reservist, I was a part-time member. So I was also a full-time university student at the University of Manitoba, and I was studying engineering while I was part-time in the Navy band. And I continued with university. I eventually graduated, and I continued with a civilian career in music while I was playing part-time in the band. And once I was graduated university and I was looking for full-time employment, a full-time employment opportunity became available at my unit here in Winnipeg, HMCS CHIPPAWA, for the full-time recruiter position. So I applied for the position and I got the job, and that was in 2016. So I'm still a Naval Reservist. But what many people don't know is that even as a part-time reservist, you do have an opportunity for some full-time employment in the form of temporary full-time contract. So that's what I've been doing since 2016. So I don't have a lot of experience at sea as a member of the Navy, but I do have a lot of experience with the application process, all the administration and requirements to become a member of the Canadian Armed Forces. So that is my area of expertise. So I'm very happy to talk about that.
For most of us, we don't know where to find information related to the Canadian Armed Forces. I know there's a website, but if someone, want to know where the fitment is and within the rank structure, where they can see themselves and what it requires for them to be there.
It's a lot of information, so I'm going to try to break it down into some parts here. I guess first of all, to start with is where to find the information. So you mentioned the website forces.ca, but sometimes it can be difficult to find the details that you're looking for on the website. So the next source that I would recommend is to talk directly to a recruiter. And the way to do that is, it might even be easier to use Google than forces.ca, is to type into Google, find a recruiter, forces, Canadian Armed Forces. The URL is forces.ca/en for English /find a recruiter. But sometimes it can be hard to locate. So it should come up if you search it in Google, and then you can put in your address or postal code, and a map will pop up with all the recruiting centers that are in your area. And then you can call or email with the contact information provided on that site and talk to a recruiter that is in your local area and get the most detailed information that pertains to what you're interested in. That's my recommendation. The other one is to check out the Prairie Sailor YouTube channel. I put informational videos up about all different things about the application process and life in the Navy, in the prairies, but it applies nationally as well. I talk about policies that are national. So you got the website. Contacting your local recruiter through the Find a Recruiter is my number one recommendation, and then also checking out my videos on the Prairie Sailor site is the best ways to get information. So we talked about the different employment opportunities, and this ties in with the Find a Recruiter as well, because I'm just going to give an overview of how the system works for recruiting in Canada for the military. So the two main components of the military are the regular force, which is full-time, and the reserve force, which is part-time. So for regular force, not every city, but most major cities in Canada will have a Canadian Forces Recruiting Center that handles all applications. So Army, Navy, Air Force, officers, non-commissioned members, it doesn't matter what you're interested in. If you want full-time, they all go to the same place, the Canadian Armed Forces Recruiting Center. If you're looking part-time, all of the different reserve units and divisions do their own recruiting. So in those cases, you would go directly to, if you want to be in the Navy, the Naval Reserve Division, or if you want to be in the Army, the Army unit that you're interested in applying to, and then you could apply to them direct. So it's just a little bit different there, and we're pretty good at communicating with each other. And, if someone calls me and says, oh, I'm interested in the Army, but they came across my number, I'll help them out with contact information to get them to the right place. But just to remember that for full-time employment, it's just one place, and part-time employment is all the individual units is going to be who you want to be communicating with.
One thing interesting I found was the age criteria. It's so flexible when it comes to Canadian Armed Forces. I know some of the armed forces throughout the world has age restriction, like you reach a certain threshold when you're young, you can no more think of joining armed. When it comes to Canadian Armed Forces, it's so flexible with age. If you're going to give some insight into the age one can join in, and when it comes to gender, right, are the physical standards same, or depending on what they're joining, how does it all?
Yeah, great question. So I'll talk about the three minimum application criteria, which is age, education, and citizenship. So for age, age, it's a little bit different for the regular force and reserves, because reserves is just part-time. So you can join while you're still in high school because it's evenings and weekends. We don't want people dropping out of school to join the military. But if you're a full-time high school student, you're completed grade 10, you can apply to the reserves at the age of 16. If you want to go full-time to the regular force, then you have to be 17 and you also have to be completed grade 10. So minimum age is 16 for reserves, 17 for regular force. The maximum age is the same for each. We have retirement at the age of 60, and they want at least an equal number of years of service equal to how many years to gain your training. So for most occupations, the cutoff point then is going to be 56 or 57 years old, so that you have a little bit of training and then a little bit of years of service. But yes, you can apply to the Canadian Armed Forces up to the age of 56, and even in some cases, maybe 7. So you're right that it is quite flexible for age. For education, the minimum requirement, as I mentioned, is grade 10 complete. For some occupations, there are higher education standards, and they're specific to each occupation. That's the minimum general requirement. And then for officer positions, for leadership role, you have to have a university degree, a bachelor's degree or baccalaureate. And then in some occupations have specialized degrees, obviously, that are related to the job to be performed. But some general officer occupations will just say any baccalaureate degree is acceptable. I will also mention for the reserves, again, because it's part-time, you can join the reserves while you're still in school, is that we have an entry program called the Reserve Entry Scheme for Officers, which means that as long as you're enrolled in a degree program, even if you haven't completed yet, you can join the reserves as an officer. And then the last one is citizenship requirement, and that has recently been expanded in 2022 to include permanent residents. So we're very happy to share and to announce that permanent residents are now eligible to apply to the Canadian Armed Forces.
So a follow-up question I have is, a lot of permanent residents who come, they get a Canadian equivalent assessment done while they are outside, and that's how their selection happens. So when you say a university degree, do they need to have a university degree in Canada, or the equivalent from their home country helps as the criteria?
Yes, great question. Thank you. To clarify on that, it does not need to be completed in Canada, but we do need the Canadian equivalency assessment done in Canada. So we have a number of different organizations that will perform the equivalencies assessment. We don't do it ourselves. You have WES, World Education Services. We accept the IQAS, ICAS. There's a number of them, and you can go on the website and there will be a list of the organizations that we accept the equivalency assessment to be complete.
Does serving in Canadian Armed Forces make you eligible for pension? If yes, what is the minimum number of years you need to be in for getting a pension, and perks of being in Canadian Armed Forces?
Yes. Okay. So for pension, yes, we do offer pension both for full-time employment with the regular force, and even as a part-time employee with the reserves, you're still paying into a pension. However, it's not the same full pension with the same benefits. And I'm not expert enough to go into the incredibly intricate details of the pension programs and how they work out. But I do know as a general rule of thumb that they're looking for 25 years of service, full-time service, to be eligible for the full pension. But there's tons of calculations and rules that go into it. So I don't want to go into the details and get anything wrong, but all of that information is available online. If you go to canada.ca, there's pension information.
Some countries, for a non-commissioned officer, they want a minimum of 17 to 18 years, which includes their training part, to be eligible for pension. And when it comes to the officer cadre, minimum of 20 years, which does not include your training. Once you do that, and once you have done your pensionable service, whatever your last drawn salary is, 50% of that becomes your pension when it starts, and then of course it is adjusted according to inflation and many other factors. But I know it's difficult to make an interpretation.
As a reservist, I paid into the part-time pension program for my career, and when I switched over to full-time, if you do a minimum of 5 years of full-time service continuous, you are eligible for the regular force pension, even though I'm a reservist. So I know that from my own personal experience, and I also know that there are elaborate calculations that go into play depending on how many years you've served and how many, if you've been switching between full-time and part-time like myself, how many of those days were part-time and how many were full-time. So again, I can't speak to the exact details of the program, but I can tell you that they're extremely helpful.
One more thing which I came across and found it really, really interesting is the Canadian Armed Forces flexibility to not have short haircut, allowing tattoos. And this is not a very common practice across, look at the global armed forces, but this is one way of inviting and telling that, you're accepted as long as you're disciplined and you can perform your duties. Some insight on this, like it's so encouraging for someone who has religious practice where they cannot perform certain activities like, shaving their beard and etc. So how it has been welcome within the armed forces, maybe if you're not able to speak on that, like, do you see this encouraging for people to really come in and participate more in the armed forces?
Yes. Well, I'm not going to give my personal opinion on what I think about federal government policies and military policies, but I will tell you that I have had 18 years of short haircuts, and when they changed the policy, I got a bit of a ponytail back here now, so I'm trying it out myself, and the important thing is to still look professional and have discipline. And I can also tell you that when the changes to the dress regulations came out, they were quite open-ended, and a lot of people were taking advantage of that. I will let you know that in the very near future, the dress regulations are going to be backtracked a little bit, not to how they were before, but have a little bit more restrictions on the color that you can dye your hair and the length of beard. So I know that, yes, you'll still be permitted to have a beard. You don't have to be clean shaven. And yes, the dress regulations will still be gender neutral, meaning that men can have long hair the same as women, as long as it meets the dress standard of being well kept and professional. And there's certain hairstyles that are permitted and some that are not, like having hair bangs covering your face, etc., and a few things like that. And if it's past the length of the collar, it needs to be tied back to a braid or ponytail. So there's some restrictions on how the hair must be presented, but it doesn't have to be shaved off short at boot camp like when I joined in 2005. So yes, I think that it is welcoming and encouraging to some people that they're not subject to those very strict shaving and haircut policies that are common with many militaries around the world. And there's actually a recent news story. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the military skills competition, Sandhurst skills competition conducted at West Point. I saw a social media post recently talking about the Canadian team with their long hair. They were all had mullets, and people were making a lot of comments about that. But the other point I'd like to point out is that there was two Canadian teams, and one of them placed second and one of them placed fifth. And this is out of 45 teams from 15 different countries. So I think that as far as discipline, professionalism, and skill goes, the Canadian Armed Forces still has all of those traits in good supply, and having a little bit of a more relaxed dress regulations can be welcoming and encouraging for some people to join without taking away from the professionalism and skill and discipline of the Canadian Armed.
So this question is very specific to the individuals who come as permanent residents. Most of them come along with their spouse. And in some countries, when you are serving in the military or the armed forces, you have to be separated from the family. So is it the same case with the Canadian Armed Forces, or again, there are flexibilities where you can keep your families at the station where you are, or again, it is very subjective to station where you get posted?
So again, I will let you know that as a reservist and a reserve recruiter, I'm not expert in all of the regular force policies. So I do know some things that, first of all, yes, men and women who are married are very welcome to apply to the Canadian Armed Forces. There's no restrictions on that in any way. And even we have several service couples where both husband and wife are members of the Canadian Armed Forces, and that's perfectly doable as well. The one concern with the regular force is you can be posted, right? You can be posted based on the requirements of your job to any location within Canada and beyond. And sometimes this can be a challenge for family. In general, for long-term postings, the family would move with the military military member to the new city, and there are benefits and allowances for making military move. So I'm not an expert on all of those policies, but I know that there are benefits and allowances to help families with moving. I think in my experience, I've known a few people who have been posted temporarily away from their families, and it is a challenge, especially in the Navy. If you're on a deployment, if you get posted to the East Coast or the West Coast, your family will probably move with you, but they're not going on the ship with you, right? So you can be at sea for months at a time. So it's definitely one of the biggest challenges being in the Canadian Armed Forces is being deployed, being on duty, having time away from your family. There are many resources available to help assist members with these challenges, but it's definitely a part of the job.
So some of the countries, what they do is when there are separations, they have some allowance called house rental allowance, where because you're separated from the family and family has to take care of themselves, certain portion of your salaries, threshold gets added as an house rental allowance, and then you get some tax benefits overall. That's how the incentive to families who are separated works. And in some cases, when children goes for higher education, the universities have the armed forces children specific concessions when it comes to joining the universities. So that's how they get priority. So is there anything like for the children when they go to universities, they get some preferential treatment? Is not the right word, but because the armed forces member is safeguarding the nation as a part of their work, that gets extended to the
right. I'm not aware. I don't believe that there are any programs for post-secondary education for children of military members. We do have benefits for post-secondary education for military members. And I can talk about that a little bit because we just talked about pension, but we didn't talk about some of the other benefits because there are, again, many different programs. But this is something that I am a little bit more of an expert in. So I do know about all the different programs as a recruiter. So for the regular force, there are basically 3 different ways to get post-secondary education through the military. First one would be to apply to the Royal Canadian Military College, competitive application process. But if you have good grades and a good resume, you can apply and to become an officer and go to the Royal Military College, or OTP, which is the regular officer training plan. And this would be if you're going to be an officer in the Canadian Armed Forces and you're getting your post-secondary education at a civilian university, and the Canadian Armed Forces is paying for your tuition. So this is a little bit different, and it's generally for programs that are specialized that they wouldn't offer at the Royal Military College. Like if you wanted to be a doctor, for example, and you were going to medical school, they don't have medical school or RMC, so you go to a civilian institution and get it paid for by the military. And again, there's specific calculations depending on individual situations, but the general rule of thumb is that for any time receiving paid education, for each month of paid education, you would owe 2 months of service in return. So basically the length of your contract duration would be determined by the amount of time that forces was providing education. And you'd also be receiving a paycheck while you're going to school on top of the tuition. Be a salary, like you're a Canadian Armed Forces member, and you would be making your standard salary, and part of your job would be attending your university. And then the third one for regular force for full-time would be, it's called NCM Step. And this is post-secondary education for non-commissioned members, for members who are not. And again, it would be programs that are professional development or skills, and you could apply. There's a list of approved programs available on the website, and you can apply for this program where that would be paid for again, and then you would owe years of service in your contract in return. So those are all the regular force, the full-time programs. And then for the Naval Reserves, we have academic reimbursement, which is 50% of your tuition up to the maximum of $1,000 per year, up to a lifetime maximum of $8,000. So in the reserves, we give you less money, but there's no long-term commitment. There's no years of service in return. So you could add, you're only working part-time for us. So you could be working in the reserves on evenings and weekends, going to university full-time, and receiving up to $2,000 per year from us for tuition. And once you graduate, you're a reservist. You could voluntarily release from the reserves at any time. You have no long-term commitment.
I was thinking that when you say reserve, you go for a certain number of months in a year, and then you commit to yourself here. You can stay at one place, go on a weekend, attend to the programs, attend to your military training, and be available for nation's call. So this is something really interesting. Like this should motivate people to look for options as in reserve cannot make it into the regular army.
Yes, and I'm glad that you brought that up because there's just so much information. I'm kind of bouncing around here answering your questions, but I'll go back to the beginning what I normally do if I'm doing my recruiting presentation and just talk about the differences between the regular force and the reserves. Because this whole time I'm saying, oh, regular force is this, reserve is that. What are the reserves? What are the differences, right? So, I mean, the obvious one is that regular force is full-time and reserves is part-time. But the addendum to that is there are actually some full-time employment opportunities available with the reserves as well. Part of our job is to augment, support the regular force. So we are trained reservists who are able to backfill positions. So we can get short-term, full-time contract, the regular force once we're fully trained as reservists. And there are even a small number of full-time positions available within the reserve. It's primarily part-time, but just so people are aware that can work full-time as a reservist, because not everybody knows that. Number two is the long-term commitment. So as I mentioned a couple times, in the regular force, it's normal when you join, you'll get a terms of service, which will designate the amount of time that you're committing to serve. The minimum, I think, again, I'm a reservist, not a regular force, but I think the minimum you can get is around 3 years, and they can be 5 years, 7 years, even up to 9 years. And it depends on things like how long the training for your occupation is going to be, how much they're investing in training you, if they're giving you any money for education, as we talked about before, is going to determine how long your contract are, factors like that. In the reserves, it's an indefinite period of service. You're not signing up for any long-term period. You can voluntarily withdraw from the reserves at any time. The only addendum to that to be aware of is that in the case of an emergency, you could be called into service for up to 1 year from when you withdraw. But there's no long-term commitment in the reserve. The next, to live. So we talked about postings in the regular force. So yes, it's true. As a member of full-time regular force, you can be posted to different locations around Canada or internationally, depending on the requirements of the job. In the reserves, you could do your entire career for 42 years, from 18 to 60 in one place. And I actually know people who have retired at 60 and were at HMCS CHIPPAWA in Winnipeg the entire time. So yes, in the reserve, we do travel for training. We have to travel to different, especially in the Navy, we go to the coast frequently to do our training programs and stay up to date on all of our skills, and also travel for deployments. If you're volunteering to support the regular force on the deployment, obviously your job is going to involve travel, but your home base can remain the same. You don't get posted or have to move yourself and your family to live at different locations. A couple of things to add to that is if you do choose to move, say you're doing a university program or you got a great civilian job in another city and you're moving there, it's very easy to transfer between reserve divisions. I know in the Navy, we have 24 Naval Reserve divisions in Canada. So most major cities in Canada have a Naval Reserve division. So if you're moving to another city, it's very easy to transfer. So you have a job waiting for you, your part-time job on the side waiting for you in almost any city in Canada if you're planning on. So last thing about the reserves is the working schedule, is that, as I mentioned before, it's evenings and weekends. And we base our schedule largely on the university schedule because we have a lot of members who are students. So we work our part-time hours from September until May, just like a typical Canadian university. Every unit is going to be different. So I'm not going to say that they're all going to be the same, but in Winnipeg here, we do Tuesday and Thursday evenings and an average of 1 weekend per month. And that's September till May. And then in the summer, we offer our full-time training courses, which are paid. All training in the military is paid, or in the Canadian military. So for students, it's great because it's a part-time job while you're in class and a full-time summer job all in one. So there's that great benefit there as well, that you're not looking for a summer job each year. One of the challenges of the reserve, if you do have a full-time civilian job, is getting time off work to do military training, because some of our occupations require training ranging anywhere from 3 weeks up to 3 or 4 months in length, especially like naval warfare officer, a seagoing occupation where you have to spend time on a ship doing navigation, giving commands, to get qualified. It's a responsibility. So it can be a challenge to get time off work. And this is one of the common questions I get, which is why I'm jumping into it. But we have a number of resources available in Manitoba, and most provinces in Canada, I think, have job protection legislation. So your civilian employer, those protections so that you don't lose your job, or they keep a position available for you if you're taking time off to do military training. There's other benefits in place through the CFLC, the Canadian Forces Liaison Council, which has a number of supports available for military members. And I have a whole video about this with all the details on my YouTube channel. So you can go check it out. Because there's a lot of information to get across, and just know that it can be difficult to get time off work, of course, to do military training, but we do have some supports and programs available to assist with that.
So I have one last question because of paucity of time. And again, this is from one of my audience. It may look funny, but it's an interesting question. He says that the country from where he comes from when you serve in the armed forces, the retail outlets don't charge you taxes when you buy stuff by showing the armed forces card, and also you get liquor dirt cheap. So is that the case with the Canadian Armed Forces too?
Well, it's not completely accurate. I'd say we do have to pay tax just like everybody else. But there are a lot of military discounts out there. And there's a card that you can get called the CF1 card for Canadian Forces. And they have a website, and they do a great job of keeping track of all the different businesses and organizations that offer military discounts. So you can go and check it out. And things that I've taken advantage of in the time is discounts on car rentals. I know Enterprise car rent. I mean, I'll name 5 or 6 things, but there's dozens and dozens and dozens, right? Yes. Hotel bookings and lots of stores have really good military discounts. So you still have to pay tax, but there's lots of organizations and businesses that offer military discount.
So any discount when someone is traveling by air or by train, being a Canadian Armed Forces personnel, or?
Yes, some airlines have discounts. One of the best benefits that we receive actually is through WestJet. There's an unlimited baggage allowance. So, and that's for the reason of, when we're traveling for the military, sometimes we got big kit bags full of stuff, all our different uniforms and equipment and stuff like that. But the benefit is great because it's on and off. So that's one that I really enjoy, is not having to pay for extra luggage if you're traveling, because lots of times we have lots of equipment to take, but it counts off duty as well, which can be a great benefit. And sorry, when you asked about benefits, we talked about pension, and admittedly, I'm not an expert, but we do have a lot of other benefits I'm very aware of. So I'll just touch on those really briefly. So we talked all about the education reimbursement program and all the different ways to get post-secondary education. And you had mentioned about children. So for children, we have the Public Service Healthcare Plan, the PHCP, as federal government employees. So if you're full-time with the regular force, or if you're in a reservist, but you work full-time for 180 days or more, you're eligible for the PSHP, which is a very comprehensive healthcare coverage plan for healthcare and dental that covers all of your dependents, so spouse and children. So we have a really good healthcare benefits for yourself and for your family is one. And one that is really great as a reservist is we have a dental benefit for even people who are just part-time. So even if you're just a part-time reservist and you don't have 180 days full-time service, you still are eligible for the reservist dental benefit, which is 90% dental coverage for routine dental care, which not a lot of part-time jobs offer dental benefit. So that's a really great one that I wanted to mention as well.
Thank you for sharing everything and taking time today. I'm sure.
Do we have time for one more?
Yes.
Okay, great. Because we didn't talk about. We talked about the 3 minimum requirements: age, citizenship, and education, and all the different levels of each. But we didn't talk about the application process, which is out of all the things we talked about today, is my number one area of expertise. So I'd love to talk about that and give your audience some information about how it actually works. Step 1 is completing the online application, and that even if you're not 100% sure on all your decisions for the occupations, etc., it's not a big deal to make changes in the early stages of the application. So it's a good idea to get it started, and you can the recruiter will contact you once you've submitted your online application, and you can make changes and your final decisions at that point. Not to be discouraged by the lengthy and detailed online application, because it's no problem. Even if you're having problems with the computer and filling out the forms online, once you've initiated online, at least, we can even do some of the forms on paper by hand and make ink amendments. So not to be discouraged by that. The second thing I want to talk about is the fitness requirement, the Canadian Armed Forces Force Evaluation. So I do have a detailed demonstration video on this, again, on my channel, which I encourage you to check out. And I'll just clarify it for everyone that for the reserves, yes, you need to complete the fitness evaluation prior to joining. It's as a part of the application process. For the regular force, you do not, but it will be completed in the first week of your basic military qualification. So either way, you have to do the test, but in the reserves, you do it before you're enrolled, and the regular force, you do it after you're enrolled. If you're unsuccessful in the regular force on basic training, they'll put you in a special fitness program, and give you time to train and practice and prepare, and they'll give you another chance later on in the course to make sure that you're able to pass the test. Next one is the aptitude test, the Canadian Forces Aptitude Test, or CFAT. So this one is a brand new pilot project where for many occupations there's exemptions from writing the CFAT depending on your education and a number of other factors. And there's way too much detail on this one to go into it here. So I will again point you to my video on it on the Prairie Sailor channel. I have a 20-minute video doing all the details of who is exempt and why. In general, really quick summary, I'll just say for the regular force, there's many occupations that you can be exempt from the CFAT depending on your education and other factors. For the reserves, yes, you still have to write the CFAT in the majority of cases. So that's something to be aware of. And one other thing to be aware of is that similar to the fitness test, even in the regular force, once you become a member of the Canadian Armed Forces on basic training, you still will have to write the aptitude test. It will not affect your career progression. They just want to have it for data purposes. It doesn't matter if you don't meet the standard for certain occupations, you're already in and you'll already be able to progress with your career as planned. Online application, fitness test for reservists, aptitude test with exceptions, look it up. Lots of exceptions. Next is going to be the security clearance. And this is one point that I really want to make sure that people are aware of, is that the security clearance can take a long time, especially for permanent residents. So when they opened applications up to permanent residents, within the first year, there was 21,000 applications. So maybe they weren't prepared for the volume of response that they received from permanent residents. Obviously, there's many permanent residents in Canada who are eager to join the Canadian Armed Forces and serve. So that is very commendable. And unfortunately, we've been a little bit slow on processing the security clearances because it is a little bit more in depth when they're having to work with people who've been in Canada for less than 10 years and doing international checks and things like that. For the background checks, it can take 6 to 18 months, and in some cases even up to 24 months. It is difficult to wait that long for a job, and we're doing our best to cut those times down. They're just dealing with the transition in the situation here. And my recommendation, in the reserves at least, if you're waiting for a part-time job, then it's a little bit easier than if you're waiting for a full-time job, because then you're not worried about when is it going to start, when am I going to have to quit my current job. So applying to the reserves can be a way to get through that waiting period. So security clearance, we've covered that. Next is the medical, which is done at the Canadian Forces Recruiting Center. Even if you are applying as a reservist, we don't have medical staff at Reserve in the Navy anyway. In the Army, I believe some units do. But the medical, they're going to be introduced about your medical history, do a quick physical and things like that. You have to meet the minimum medical standard for entrance into Canadian Armed Forces. And finally, the interview. So the interview will be with a recruiter or military career counselor. It's going to talk about suitability for the Canadian Armed Forces and maybe specific requirements of the occupation that you're applying for. It's just a job interview, right? So that's the entire process. The physical fitness, the aptitude, the security clearance, the medical, and the interview. So it can take some time. Admittedly, the processing time to become a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, the average for where I work as a reservist is kind of 4 to 6 months. But again, if you have the security clearance that's extended, it can be up to 6 to 18 months. Well, thank you very much, Gopi, for having me today. I'm very happy to be sharing information about the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you.